what are the sort of remedies that are available? What happens when you do? This is wonderful stuff to know all this, but what do you do once you actually find that there is a infringement of your domain name, or somebody has illegally or inappropriately registered it and put up content on there which you obviously don't like or don't agree with, and you feel violated, or the business feels that its interests are violated? But what you do is, the first thing you can do is anybody would tell you is probably go to court. Well, let's take an example, and I want to caution here before you go to court. It's not the most effective or useful tool when it comes to the internet or global mechanisms of domain names, etc. The reason why it's not effective is because domain names are global, right? So if you get a judgment from a Pakistani court, for instance, in regards a domain name, there could be another judgment against that or for that in another jurisdiction. That creates a conflict, and we get into a whole bunch of legal issues there. But let's look at the practicalities. For instance, if you've got a .com domain name and you go to court and you say, well, x.com, I'm just giving you an example. X doesn't, you can't register, but anything.com, CIOPakistan.com, for instance, has been infringed upon, and you go to court and try to get this. Now, what will happen then is that a Pakistani court, the first thing it will do, if you're lucky, is to suspend the use of that domain name. Now, that's just the initial injunction that the court, or stay order, restraining order the court issues. And the case hasn't ended yet. The case hasn't even started yet, really. And you're going to want to go to the person, the registrar or the registry, and say, please suspend access of this domain name or the use of the domain name, or basically, technically, the domain name resolving to that server, and basically suspend its use. That becomes a major issue and a difficulty for registrars and registries. It's technically a difficulty, but nonetheless, some of them may comply. The problem with that is that you haven't solved the problem. The case continues to pend in court. In Pakistan, for instance, that case may continue for anything of excess of 5 years until you really have a final resolution. And even after that, even within that period and after that period, you could continue to have appeals. So it doesn't solve your problem. Now, what is the mechanism which is a little more effective than that? The more effective mechanism would be to go into something called the online dispute resolution mechanism that has been created for both generic TLDs as well as many CC or country code TLDs if they have that policy. So let's take the example first of generic TLDs, CIOPakistan.com, for instance. I've constantly been using that example. If there's a violation or infringement, the first thing you would do is either send a notice, and sometimes it's advisable, not advisable, to the person who's the registrant. So you go to the who is lookup, you look at who the registrant of this is, who the technical or the other contact information, administrative contact information exists. You would contact them, maybe send them a notice saying you have infringed this, either immediately suspend and release the domain and give it to us, otherwise we'll take appropriate legal action. The difficulty with that sort of legal notice going out are the following. Number one, it doesn't do much. Number two, it puts the other party on notice to the fact that somebody is trying to launch a legal battle against them, which means that they immediately can put stuff on their website to try and justify their use of that domain name. I'll give you an example of something that happened recently. Jung. Okay? Now, Jung.pk, for instance, at the moment the person realized that a notice has been issued to them, decided to put up generic Jung, meaning war, saying, well, this is for historical purposes, nothing to do with the newspaper Jung. So if you give them notice, they might do that sort of thing. So that's the second reason. The third thing they might do is immediately say, oh, okay, so if I'm using a .com one, let me hop registrars. And so what they do is they'd move from one registrar and ask for the transfer of that domain name to another registrar so that the suspension order does not become effective. So to that extent, notice and takedown or notices to cyber squatters have their own concerns. The most effective mechanism, and some people would say would be the first step, and this depends on the case, is that of basically going to the online dispute resolution, as I mentioned. For generic TLDs, you have something that ICANN has set up called the Universal Dispute Resolution Policy, UDRP. It's available on the ICANN website. It's also available otherwise if you search it on through Google or others, you'll find it. That is the policy under which any person who's registered a domain name, which is a generic domain name, .com, .net, whatever, is bound. And that policy actually puts into place certain rules by which anybody who wants to contest the registration by that particular person of the domain name can actually file a case, if you will, a complaint. So there are two places the complaints can be filed. One would be WIPO, They have a dispute resolution body. And the second is national arbitration in the USA. You can file it with them as well. Now you can go to the websites of these two institutions and look for, data on cases that have previously been done and things like that. They have forms which are online. You can fill those forms up, pay the requisite fee. You don't have to go visit anywhere. You don't have to fly to Geneva if you're going to go before WIPO. You don't have to fly to the USA if you're going to use the NAF. You can simply do an online filing of your complaint with the requisite documentation being scanned and sent. You can send it through post, courier if you wish, and they will then proceed with issuing notice to the registrant who has to file a reply. And on the basis of that, an arbitrator, it's like an arbitration basically, would then decide whether or not that domain name should continue to be with the registrant, who's the current registrant, or should be transferred to or not to the complainant. Now, that's the way, for instance, the .coms work. I'm being very, very basic here. There's a lot more depth there, but that's your basic recourse that you would have. The advantage of that sort of situation is that within a period of anything between 30 to 60 days, depending on how long you take to file, etc., you would have a decision, which would be a final decision. The advantage of that final decision is then that would be implemented and enforced, because it's an ICANN mandated one of the UDRP, by the registrars and the registries of ICANN. And that means no 5 years in court, means no hefty payments of legal fees, and means immediate enforcement. Don't forget that even if you were to win a case in court, you would still have to file an execution proceedings, which could take an additional 5 years. This is saying if you don't have an appeal. So saving all those problems, what you should do is you should go directly to a dispute resolution body and file your complaint there. Let's take the example of a CCTLD one, say .pk. In Pakistan, if you have, say, for instance, CIO Pakistan.pk, a domain name, which gets cyber squatted by somebody who wants to make, to, I guess, loosely use the word term, blackmail CIOPakistan.com to acquire that domain name from him through huge amounts of payments, then you would go to something called the Domain Name Dispute Resolution Center, called the DNDRC.com. Again, it would be the same sort of procedure. It's cheaper than the WIPO and others. You would there are online forms, you'd fill those out, you would send electronic complaint forms to them. They would then send the notice out. The respondent would respond with a reply. Again, it's online. You don't have to visit anywhere. You don't have to appear physically anywhere. And on the basis of that, a decision would be taken within a short period of time, probably around 30 days, etc. And within a week or so, the .pk CCTLD manager in Pakistan would have to implement that. And that would be something that again, it makes it much easier to use that mechanism, because it's not only speedy, cheaper, more accurate, and enforceable at the end of the day. And that's why it would be much more advisable to follow those paths than to, say, for instance, go to court or send legal notice, etc., which you could do. Nobody can stop you from doing that. But the effectiveness of that would be something that you would have to consider yourself. Should you have the advantage of having legal advice? I know this sounds self-serving because I'm a lawyer, but please do, because sometimes you can make mistakes about how to present your case. Get those complaint forms vetted by a lawyer. If you are the respondent, i.e. the registrant, make sure that your response, etc., is also vetted by a lawyer, and so that you can, be well advised when you basically launch these, go into these battles of ADRs. So that basically gives you, at the end of this segment, a overview. And many terms used in this are not technical, because I'm trying to basically get through to consumers and businesses who may not be very well aware of the technical terms in domain name management, etc. But basically, it's about protecting brands and your presence on the internet. And I think that's what we're trying to focus here and try to give you an idea of as a startup in this few minutes as to how to protect yourself. Also, if you have any questions, queries, any comments, etc., please feel free to put them onto the blogs on CIO Pakistan, or email it to the email address which is displayed on the screen at the moment, and we will do our best not only to respond but maybe even help you with many of your queries, and we look forward to them.